Alright, so, like I said, I was using this playlist from Kings and Generals called Alexander's Conquest and the Diadochi Wars. I followed the individual parts of Alexander, and he does make individual parts for the Diadochi. The thing is, I see always Kings and Generals always at the end of his series makes a really long one where it's all combined, but what's different is that he adds in different events that he doesn't in his individual videos. And normally I usually ignore the longer video because when I see the 3 hour thing, I'm like, crap, I'm gonna have to sit there for like 3 hours. But the thing is, I'm a huge nerd right now for the, Hellenistic world. I really love learning about the Greeks and Greek history, so this is probably one of the few times I'm willing to just sit down and watch the full 3 hour thing. Granted, I'm gonna divide it into parts, not all in one sitting, like we did when the Roman conquest of Greece, So, yeah, I made some timestamps when to stop, and yeah, I'm gonna divide this video and for the next few days, and just see how we go with it. So yeah, the Diadochi Wars is just an event that I find so interesting. It's a very underrated historical event. No one really talks about it. But yet the successor kingdoms of Alexander fighting when the world was ruled by phalanxes and war elephants. It's a really cool, interesting thing, because it's usually Alexander and then we jump to the rise of Rome. But yeah, we forget that the Diadochi basically were the kings of the world before Rome came along, So yeah, this is just gonna be really interesting to see. So the first part, we're gonna be learning about the Lamian War. So let's get to it, shall we? Let's start with the first episode of the Diadochi Wars, the Lamian War.
The Wars of the Diadochi were a long period of successive and destructive wars in Greece and the Middle East over the ruins of Alexander's empire. His generals, the Diadochi, and their sons, the Epigoni, fought tooth and nail with horizon-spanning armies to secure as much of his empire as they could, with the help of both Greek and barbarian troops. In our series, we have tried to cover as much of the wars as possible, but there are more stories to tell. In this long-form video, we will try to fill in the gaps and discuss lesser-known details of the wars, such as the Nabatean confrontations and the Celtic invasions of Greece. We will also more extensively discuss the aftermath of the Syrian wars between the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasties. As this epic showdown unfolds with this new information, we will provide more
Like I said, the phalanx really was the ultimate maneuver because everyone after Alexander's death was trying to be exactly like him. So the phalanx basically ruled the world as the main military fighting way, and that's the funniest thing. Everyone's using Alexander's playbook, and so it's just a bunch of phalanxes and war elephants. So it's like two porcupines like having sex, as I always described it. Because can you imagine how just long sarissas everywhere poking at you, just seeing two phalanxes clash just would look like such a complete mess, but really cool, you know what I mean?
entertaining and informative content while also correcting any mistakes in our shorter videos. Welcome to our overview of the Wars of the Diadochi, their epic battles, and the birth of the Hellenistic Age. There is one series of wars that's even... Before getting into our long story, we must first discuss our primary sources. Like the Persian and Peloponnesian Wars, most of our information on the Diadochi Wars comes from one ancient writer, Diodorus Sikellos. Diodorus Sikellos was from Sicily and lived in the 1st century BCE. His Bibliotheca Historica is a significant work of universal history, from mythic times to the start of the Gallic Wars. There are issues with his work, such as unreliable sourcing, but modern scholars generally consider his work on the Diadochi to be useful. In addition to Diodorus, the Greek philosopher Plutarch wrote some stories relevant to the Diadochi Wars. Other ancient sources, such as the Roman historian Justin or surviving inscriptions on Babylonian cuneiform tablets, have allowed scholars to construct...
Okay, so it says right here, Diadochi literally means heirs or successors in Greek. Another word is epigonoi, which also means successors and refers to the second generation of the ruling dynasties involved in the wars.
Construct a rough chronology of the significant events of the Hellenistic era. Another thing to consider is the nature of the Macedonian or Hellenistic monarchies, who acted as the main drivers of these conflicts. Macedonian kingship revolved around delegating duties from the king to his companions, or fili, friends who grew up and fought alongside him. In addition, military values dominated Macedonian life. Thus, when Macedonian kings ended up ruling over lands of incredible wealth, like Persia, people who felt they had a noble right to rule due to Macedonian courtly values ended up clashing with other generals of less noble birth who had invested in fighting with Alexander. The various parts of the empire the Diadochi ended up ruling had their own traditions and social structures, and this impacted how each epigonos acted. Hellenistic kingship emulated Alexander for legitimacy, at least in the early period, and this appeal to continuity is a key issue for the wars. The Diadochi used these militaristic values to assert control in their courts and form government structures on top of the existing local ones. After an initial morning shock, the Diadochi met before an assembly of their soldiers in front of Alexander's empty throne in the partition of Babylon, called by Perdiccas, the man who now served as temporary regent over Alexander's empire. Perdiccas, the son of a noble Macedonian family from Orestis, had placed the diadem, ring, cuirass and robe on the throne, and said that they had to choose a new leader. This immediately divided the room, as the Diadochi all had different ideas as to who that leader should be. One proposal by Nearchos, the man who had sailed from India back to Persia, was to crown Heracles, the son of Alexander and Barsine. Another choice was to wait and see if Roshanak's child would be a boy, and let him rule.
Okay, Roshanak is the Persian form of Roxanne. The name comes from the Avesta and means shining light. Her father was Oxyartes of Bactria.
Ptolemy, who had served alongside Alexander, instead proposed a rule by council. This was partially due to xenophobia, as unlike Alexander's pragmatic and ambitious policy of accommodating Persian and Greek customs into one universal monarchy, most of the Diadochi did not want to be ruled by half-Persian emperors. Ultimately, no consensus could be found, and soon conflict erupted. Meleager, an experienced general who fought against the Getae, said that this entire council was all a master plan by Perdiccas, because no matter which child ruled, he would be its guardian, and thus
The co-regency is not unheard of in the Greek world. Sparta notoriously had two kings from two dynasties. The intriguing aspect of the Macedonian situation is that this did not occur either in Macedon or in Persia, thus it suggests that the factions were to remain even if the war didn't unfold later down the line. Yeah, it's interesting that they originally brought up Alexander's legitimate kids, but again, xenophobia is like, because obviously you think, yeah, Alexander's kids should inherit his empire, but again, the xenophobia played a huge factor, and yeah, we don't want that. Also, yeah, Perdiccas would technically be a shadow puppet, like ruler, so I could definitely see that among that concern, you know?
The de facto king. In typical Greek soap opera fashion, one random soldier in the background shouted that Alexander's half-brother, Arrhidaeus, was already here and could rule. Despite objections being raised that Arrhidaeus had some sort of mental disability that allowed him to function but made him prone to bouts of instability, many soldiers agreed he should rule. Two factions formed, one of mostly generals siding with Perdiccas, and one of mostly soldiers with Arrhidaeus. Meleager, under unclear circumstances, ended up joining the second faction, and gained so much support that Perdiccas was forced to call for help from the Persian epigoni, the Persian nobles who had sided with Alexander. A stalemate developed, and the next day, Meleager assembled the mutineers to find and arrest Perdiccas. The faction that had sided with Perdiccas got Eumenes, the secretary who had served under both Philip and Alexander, and thus was respected by the common phalanx soldier, to try to calm the troops. He did so by agreeing to a co-regency of Arrhidaeus' and Roshenak's child, if it was a boy. The next day, a purification ceremony was called, but where the soldiers expected reconciliation, they got revenge. As the two sides embraced, the Persians arrested 300 seditionists. Meleager, who realized that the generals had set up a trap, fled to a temple but ended up surrendering to the Perdican faction and was murdered. This would be the first of many such backstabs. The council that resumed
reminds me of the Peers of Epirus Kings and Generals series, where there was just constant murdering and backstabbing among the Greeks, like... Yeah... Crap.
Afterwards had the following separation of courtly powers. Arrhidaeus, now Philip III, was now the king of the Macedonian Empire. Perdiccas was regent, Seleucus was companion commander, and Cassander was commander of the guard. Moreover, the massive realm Alexander had conquered was divided among the most influential of the Diadochi. Antipater got Illyria, Macedon, Epirus, and Greece. Lysimachus got Thrace, Leonatos got Hellespontine Phrygia, Antigonos got Greater Phrygia, Lycia and Pamphylia, Asander got Caria, Eumenes got Paphlagonia and Cappadocia, and Ptolemy was given Egypt. Many local Persians got satrapies as well, such as Atropates, the satrap of Media, who had once fought against but then joined forces with Alexander. Moreover, many rulers in the east, like Oxyates, the father of Roshenak, or Porus, maintained local autonomy and retained control of their people. The agency of various local non-Greek leaders will become important in the ensuing wars and the Hellenistic period in general.
Animation at Otis College brings care.
Two major players were not in Babylon when all this was unfolding. These were Antipater, the elderly regent in Macedon, and Craterus, who had been dispatched alongside Leonatos to take the veterans who wished to return home to Macedon. It was then that simmering discontent in southern Greece, which was xenophobic towards Macedonians, erupted.
Okay, Greeks in the south saw Macedonians as different from them, however they distinguished between Macedonians and barbarians. This means they acknowledged them as part of the border Hellenistic tribelings. Most likely it was Macedonian culture's influence from Thracians, Illyrians, and Scythians, as well as their, Medizing during the Persian Wars, which caused prejudice. Of course, Philip and Alexander's occasional acts of brutality are also
into outright revolt. Many city-states, especially Athens, did not like the idea of Macedonian pan-Hellenism, and this had increased after the exile's decree of 324 BCE, forcing the Greek city-states to accept all their exiled citizens back and relinquish many of their colonies. In addition to all this, there was even a bill in the Agora to recognize Alexander as a god, which for Hellenes was seen as beyond the pale. After debates in the Agora, Athens declared war and instigated a revolt. A strategos named Leosthenes led the charge against Macedonian imperialism. Many other city-states in mainland Greece joined the revolt, especially
at around the same period. Bactrian settlers revolted as well. Perdiccas sent troops which brutally crushed the revolt. However, Bactria would see its day of independence with the Greco-Bactrian kingdom decades later. It and its Indo-Greek successors would prove to be the last Hellenistic states standing.
Especially those in Aetolia and the northern Peloponnesos. However, the revolt gained less popularity in the Aegean and in Sparta, which did not want to fight under Athenian command. Leosthenes secured mercenaries with Athenian money and was elected general of the Greeks. After a short and decisive victory against pro-Macedon forces in Palatea, the Athenian strategos went to the famous site of Thermopylae to face down the Macedonian general Antipater, who had amassed 13,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry to put down the southern Hellenes' revolt. We do not know much about this battle, but we know that the Thessalian cavalry betrayed the Macedonians and ravaged their cavalry. Seeing this chaos unfold, Antipater abandoned the battlefield and fled to the city of Lamian. Leosthenes approached the city with his troops and set up a siege camp. From there, Leosthenes developed a three-tiered plan to induce Lamia's surrender. First, he took troops and marched on the city to challenge the opponents to a field battle. This failed, so Leosthenes moved on to phase 2.
It's amazing how quickly everything fell apart. Like, immediately. Just... wow. And Antipater really held down the line for, like, a long time, you know? And now I didn't know he got his butt wrecked right there. Wow.
Launching daily assaults on the city walls. However, the Lamian walls were solid and stable, and the Macedonians had an ample supply of projectiles to lob at the attackers, who were consistently repelled. This infuriated Leosthenes, who decided to use the classic strategy of cutting off all supplies into the city and ruthlessly starving the defenders to death. He also began to dig a deep trench and build a wall to completely seal off the Macedonians from the outside world. In response, Antipater decided to go for a desperate strategy. Using projectiles for cover, he took his troops outside and raided the Athenian siege camp before the trench could be completed. This attack was a success, and Leosthenes, who rushed to the aid of the soldiers during the melee, was hit in the head by a slingshot. He was rushed to his tent and died 3 days later. After this, the arrival of veterans from Macedon finally lifted the siege. The Greeks burnt their camp and retreated. They then went on to fight another battle in Meletea. In this battle, the southern Hellenes were led by Antiphilos, an Athenian with 25,000 infantry and 500 cavalry. They faced down the Macedonian Diadochi Leonatos, who possessed 20,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry. A contingent of Thessalian cavalrymen, notorious for their equestrian skills and
Okay. Bucephalius? Alexander's steed was possibly of this breed. Thessalonian horses are also descendants of Nicaean horses.
good breed of warhorses were there with Antiphilos, giving the southern Hellenes a slight advantage. After the battle lines had been drawn on both sides, Leonatos ordered his cavalry and phalanx to march forward. The Macedonian phalanx was highly successful against the Athenians due to the effectiveness of their infamous Sarisse spears, but the Thessalians pushed the Macedonian cavalry away, forcing them to retreat up the hills and gain a positional advantage. This was to be Leonatos' end, for he was mortally wounded during the commotion and died. The Thessalians tried to reach them but could not. The next day, Antipater arrived with his own troops and sought to escape from the Greeks. He managed to unite the reinforcements and his own forces at the plain, and then gained the advantage of vantage points to gain control of the landscape and provide cover for all his troops, like Artemis and Apollo shooting at Niobe's children from the sky. He took his army and left, ending the battle.
The Thessalonian cavalry is great. I've heard a lot about them and their prowess in terms of being cavalry units. And yeah, you can see it. The Thessalonians were just wrecking Antipater and the Macedonians. It goes to show you how quickly Alexander wrecked the Greeks, and now, like, now that he's gone, just how much of a struggle everything will be for everyone else, you know? I guess because most people will be using Alexander's direct tactics, so technically everyone's using the same thing and fighting each other now. So, yeah. Antipater, man, he's in a really bad situation.
Despite setbacks on land, Athens had a massive fleet it could muster against the Macedonians, though it did have issues with a lack of enough personnel to man the entire fleet, and ended up only sending off half of it. The Macedonians had issues with numbers until Kletos the White, one of Alexander's generals, arrived with reinforcements, which shifted the balance of war at sea. Here our sources become jumbled. There is no detailed account of the seaborne war, but we know of at least 2 battles. What we know is that Kletos achieved victory over the Greek rebels in the Battle of Echinades, and again in another battle on the Cyclades Islands. We know these Macedonian victories caused heavy losses to the Athenian allies, and ended the thalassocracy of Athens. In August 322 BCE, the Macedonians began their march into the rest of Greece to restore the order of things established by Alexander. Reinforcements came to enhance them, and thus, well-armed and well-supplied, they moved to the south for their vengeful strikes. Athens, Thessaly and the Aetolians rallied their troops and went forward to fight them in what has now become the Battle of Crannon. This is the last battle of the Greek revolt that we know of, and the one that genuinely sealed the fate of Hellas. Antipater's forces numbered 40,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 3,000 slingers and archers. The allied forces included 25,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry and 3,000 slingers. However, the 35,000 infantry and 3,500 cavalry. However, the Thessalians were confident in their own horses, which were known for their strength, size, and endurance. Antiphilos, the general of the Athenians and the allies, put his cavalry on the right flank. Antipater put his own cavalry opposite them on his left flank. Antiphilos commenced the battle by sending the cavalry forward. The two mounted armies clashed, and after the conflict, the more robust and durable Thessalian cavalry managed to push off the Macedonians. The battle then continued with the infantry sections of the army. The Macedonians continued pressing and slowly pushed off the anti-Macedonian front onto higher ground on the battlefield. The anti-Macedonians managed to push off any further attacks, while the cavalry, seeing that they were now without infantry allies, decided to retreat. The battle continued until the Athenians surrendered. 500 Athenians and allies died, while only 130 Macedonians died.
Wow.
Menon of Pharsalos, the leader of the cavalry, decided that the war was lost, and thus decided to send emissaries for surrender. Antipater was not amused and refused to negotiate. Slowly, the Macedonians took Thessalian cities, and each city surrendered separately. Left without allies, Athens finally surrendered unconditionally. The punishment of the Athenians was great, as they had an oligarchy imposed upon them led by a man named Phocion. Athenian contingents were to leave the Kleroukes, her settler colonies, as well as pay massive war reparations. In nearby Munichia, a Macedonian guard was to be established to keep controlling the Athenians, and anti-Macedonian rhetoricians were to be arrested. One of them, the famous Demosthenes, decided to commit suicide rather than be arrested by his enemies. From then on, the politics of Greek city-states would appear and disappear like shades of the dead in the Odyssey. Various Diadochi would make various declarations in places like Corinth linked to defending Hellenic freedom, or promise various factions freedom, control over city-states, or restoration of previous regimes. This is an important thing to consider contextually. It was an attempt to show the Greek city-states that they depended on whichever state of the Diadochi was promising them freedom. The revolt in southern Greece was over. Meanwhile, Cappadocia, which is recorded to have had various small-scale revolts, was subdued by Eumenes. However, the courtly scheming among the Diadochi would only continue. Factionalism slowly grew among the friends and generals of the late great Alexander, as Antigonos, Antipater, and Crateros began to see Perdiccas as a man with too much power, which he was wielding for his own gain. In fact, after the death of Leonatos, he was to marry Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, instead. This was orchestrated by an old player in the court, Olympias, Alexander's mother. This was a major offense to Antipater.
Wait, let me get that in one more time, sorry.
In fact, after the death of Leonatos, he was to marry Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, instead. This was orchestrated by an old player in the court, Olympias.
Yeah, I had heard about Olympias and her, she wasn't an idiot. I think she actually played a lot of politics when Alexander was gone and a bit afterwards. So it's kind of cool to see that in play. Alexander's mom and what she's doing.
Alexander's mother. This was a major offense to Antipater, as his daughter had originally been Perdiccas' intended. With Cleopatra as Perdiccas' wife, any children Perdiccas had would be first in line for the throne, as Heracles and the now-born baby boy Alexander IV were half Persian, and xenophobia meant that they were disadvantaged in the line of succession. Crateros was ordered by Antipater to take care in an increasingly hostile case of saber-rattling between Antigonos and Perdiccas in Asia Minor. Perdiccas found Eumenes, Seleucus, Python, and Antigones to be his allies, as they all had proximal satrapies under their command. Then, out of nowhere, a wild card appeared. Ptolemy had arrived in the rich and ancient powerhouse of Egypt, an important location with bountiful grain and a sophisticated state bureaucracy. The wily master of Egypt had likely been scheming for his own independence for a long while. To achieve the legitimacy to do so, he decided to do the unthinkable.
This is where he steals Alexander's body, right?
Alexander's body was in Babylon until Perdiccas sent it forth to Macedon to be buried. Along the way, and we are unsure as to where this occurred, Ptolemy appeared like the chaos snake Apophis and stole the body. He took it to Egypt, where it remains to this day undiscovered. This was more an excuse for the background scheming, but it did cause the furious Perdiccas to declare war, and thus the First War of the Diadochi began.
Probably the most
Antigonos, the
Well, alright guys, so I'm gonna end the video right here. I keep looking at my phone because I did make some timestamps when to stop each part. So yeah, this is the end of there. I'm going to look now at the First War of the Diadochi tomorrow. So stay tuned. Wait, I just want to say quickly that I love what Ptolemy did. It's just complete out of nowhere, just steals the body. Like, such a power move, but also like a giant middle finger to Perdiccas. I don't know, I find that hilarious. With that said, I'm really loving this, and I can't wait for the First War tomorrow. Bye everyone.